Good morning. Boker Tov, everybody. Shalom, shalom. If you are there with us, please let me know so we can know who's here and we can get started. Yeah. What? No. Okay. Let's wait for Facebook to post and for YouTube to do the same. Okay. Let's see what's going on. Welcome to our guest onto YouTube. Shalom, shalom. Facebook. Anybody there? Waiting for the notifications to go out automatically. On Facebook, I see Daniel's with us. Shalom, Daniel. Marty, Boker Tov. Yoni Herman, my friend, my man. And Hawkman, Hanan, and Andy. Wonderful to see everybody coming together. Lauren Feingold, Shalom Leah. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for announcing yourself. It's always good to know who I'm talking to. Got a big topic coming up today. Some very big topics. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to answer the big questions today. Okay. All right. Yoni Herman, it's my man. And Hawkman, good morning. Boker Tov, friends. And Keith Kleineck. Shalom, Keith. L'chaim. How's everybody handling this quarantine? What are we, week 5, week 6? Oh, by the way, just to let you know, I want you guys to be the first to know that we're actually going to be advertising, hopefully today, a new adult education course, which we're customizing for the quarantine. It's got to do with the mitzvahs of the home. A DIY course on things that you need to know about keeping Jewish at home. The mitzvahs, the basics. So we're going to be doing that. We're going to be advertising that a little bit later today. My question to you is, if such a course, which is a once-a-week course, should be on Zoom or on this platform that we're doing right now, should that be taking place on a platform like this, which is open forum, Facebook, YouTube, or should it be on something which is much more closed captioned on Zoom, or perhaps a mixture of both, where we have Zoom, everybody is able to talk to each other, but at the same time, it's also broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. Good morning, Warren and Helen. Good morning, Richard. And my question to you is, if you have any comments, Adrian, buenos dias. If anybody has any comments about that, we'd love to hear your thoughts about which platform we should be using for the new adult education course, which we're going to be launching sometime this week, probably. It's going to be advertised today, hopefully. And that is, it's about Jewish, fundamental Jewish basics. Once a week, over the next 4 or 5 weeks. And the question is if you think that it should be better broadcast on Zoom or YouTube, or it doesn't really make a difference. So Leah says Zoom is a great forum. Okay. But how does it compare to this one? One more thing I want to share with you is tonight is the men's club Growing Up Jewish In. That's actually going to be on Zoom. The men's club Growing Up Jewish In, taking place tonight at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Please join us. It was advertised in the email with a Friday email. And I hope we'll see you there at the men's club, 8 to 9 o'clock. Ladies are having a birthday for Brengen tomorrow night. So join Hannah and the ladies tomorrow night for the birthday for Brengen, also on Zoom. With that, I'm going to be starting right now. So good morning, everybody. And welcome to a new installment of The Gates of Trust by the 10th century scholar Rabbi Dovid Vigler. This study is so fundamental that the Chassam Sofer, the classic commentary on Talmud, would always start any Torah class with a 15-minute Torah lesson on the duties of the heart. That's this book, Duties of the Heart, part of which is Gates of Trust. It is so incredibly fundamental, accepted across the board, and something which we need to employ in our spiritual growth. Especially through these very challenging times where fear and anxiety is mounting. I hear that oil is now negative value. This is something extraordinary, never been in the history. And the world is changing in a very big way. The question is, are we changing to suit? Are we able to keep up? Or are we being fed all this information that's draining us and wearing us down, that's scaring us? Very important for us to be able to make sure that we are on the right wavelength, and that's why the Gates of Trust is so important to be able to. Why the Gates of Trust is so important to be able to keep our eye focused. What we're going to learn about today is a very important question, which is based on the doctrine of blind trust. That doctrine is that when we trust in God blindly, God reciprocates by blessing us blindly without calculating if we deserve it or not. If God is always in control, then why is it that the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper? This is an age-old, timeless question which can throw a wrench into anyone's faith. That's the question we're going to be addressing today. After validating the question, Rabbi Dovid Vigler is going to introduce us to his own perspectives on the answer. And it's going to be very interesting to put some new perspective, perhaps something which you've never thought about before, about why the wicked prosper, why the righteous suffer. To put things into perspective, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. In the meanwhile, I'd like to welcome Stephanie. I'd like to welcome wellness home specialist Julia and Brandon. And it seems like Zoom is what everybody would like. So this is good. Okay, I think it's going to be on Zoom. Very nice. Okay, let's go straight into it. If you have the book, we're at the bottom of page 387 in the Duties of the Heart. It's trust. It's the Gates of Trust, chapter 3. We're towards the end of chapter 3. Again, it's on page 387 in the book by Feldheim Publishers. This one, Duties of the Heart. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. Just follow along together with me. And the theme of today is when the righteous are afflicted and the wicked prosper. One might say we see some righteous individuals. Again, the context of the question is, if God is always in control, then how come we don't see the wicked suffering and the righteous prospering? Why is it that it's the other way around? And of course, a good morning to Sarah Kramer. Good morning, Shalom. So what's going on over here? It seems like God is not in charge. It seems like God is not in control. And our faith is challenged. Trying to get the screen straight. I can't tell. Okay, here goes. One might say, we see some righteous individuals who obtain their livelihood only after hard work and toil, while many transgressors are at ease and pass their lives in prosperity and comfort. Why? Our reply is that the prophets and pietists already already inquired into this problem. So it's not a new problem. We've been struggling with this one for quite a while. One of them asks Jeremiah, why does the way of the wicked prosper? Another says, the prophet Habakkuk, why do you show me wrongdoing and look upon vice? Violence and oppression are before me. There is strife and contention rises, for the wicked surround the righteous. He continues, why keep silent when the wicked man devours one more righteous than he? King David had a specific problem with this. He really struggled with this problem. When he writes in Psalm 73, such are the wicked ever at ease. They increase in wealth. In vain have I kept my heart pure and washed my hands in innocence, for I have been constantly afflicted and I am chastened every morning. Prophet Malachi, sometimes known as Mordechai from the Purim story, according to some commentary in the Talmud, another speaking for his contemporary, said they have tried God and escaped. And remember, Malachi lived at a time when the Jewish people returned back from Persia to build the second temple. There was rampant assimilation and desecration of Shabbat and other basic Jewish laws, and the wicked were prospering. So Malachi says they have tried God and escaped, and there are many other such passages. The prophet refrained, however, from giving an answer. So we validated the question, but we haven't really been able to find a good answer yet. And he also, the prophets refrained from explaining the reason for this, why the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. Because the reason for the trial of each one of the saints and the reason for the prosperity in this world of each one of the wicked differs from one to the other. It's not a one-size-fits-all answer. You know, our lives, nothing about our lives is one-dimensional, and nothing, therefore, about our reward and punishment is one-dimensional. So the first thing is that he tells us right now is that there's a lot more than meets the eye. There's many ways to skin a cat here, so it's not like it's that simple to give it a basic, simple answer. Moses' comment on the matter in the Torah was rather by Moses said the following with regards to this particular question. He says, the hidden things belong to Hashem our God, but those that are revealed belong to us and to our children. So Moses acquiesced and he said, look, there's certain things that are just outside of our ability to comprehend. We just can't fathom them. We can't capture. We'll never be able to understand. It's like the coronavirus. We never really understand where it comes from, how these things come into existence. We just got to sort of make peace with it at some point, at least at this point. Similarly, the wise man said, King Solomon, if you see the oppression of the poor and the denial of justice and right in a country, do not wonder at his will. He's saying, listen, certain things you're just not going to be able to understand. I've said this before, that the chess piece is never going to be able to properly understand the wisdom of the chess master. Why should you be able to understand the wisdom of the chess master? You're a nothing pawn and he's the player. Why do you think you should be able to understand the wisdom of the chess master? We are created beings with finite wisdom. We only get like 100 years of life if we're lucky. 120. God is forever. Lives forever. Beli reshit, beli tachlit, without a beginning, without an end. Hu haya, he was, hu haveh, he is, hu yeh, and he always will be. I mean, that's a pretty big difference between us and him. So why do we claim righteous indignation when we say, God, we don't understand what you're doing? You've got to recognize your place. You've got to be able to understand and say, listen, I'm just a created human being. And I'm never really going to be able to truly understand. To welcome Shelley. Good morning. Hi, Shelley. And to answer your question, Andy, we're in the third chapter of Trust in God, of the Gates of Trust. In the third chapter, near the end of the third chapter. It's like the third last paragraph. I'm not sure how they break up these paragraphs. Yeah, assuming that you have my book, we're at the bottom of page 389. Sorry, middle of page 389. And therefore, Scripture says, the rock, his deeds are perfect, and all his ways are just. We have a certain prayer that we say. We have a prayer that we say every time that somebody passes away. It's called Tziduk Hadin, the acceptance of judgment. Losing a loved one is never a pleasant experience. Is never an easy experience. When we're filled with grief and trauma, we actually say this blessing right as we're burying a loved one. tziduk adin, of accepting upon ourselves the yoke, the judgment, the burden of God's decision. We say God gave and God took away, and we don't really understand this. You know, one of our members lost his mother. We sent out an email last night, and he's burying her this morning. Nobody can really be there. Nobody's coming to the wedding, to the funeral. Even I'm not at the funeral because it's a coronavirus. I mean, it's at the time of coronavirus. The person passed away from natural causes, but you can't really get together. It's so strange. I was trying to coach him through how to do a funeral. Actually, that particular prayer you don't say today because today's still a day where you don't say Tachdun. It's still the month of Nisan. In any event, welcome, Susan. Let's get back to this. So far, we validated the question and sort of punted the answer by saying, you know what, we're never going to really understand this answer. But we've got to give it more. Rabbeinu B'chai is such a classic commentary, such a brilliant philosopher. Look at how he's going to approach this question, which is an age-old question. We've been asking this question forever. Let's address this question right now in the way that Rabbeinu B'chai himself, in his humility and his wisdom, is able to explain the answer. So at the bottom of page 389, if you have the book, if you just joined us, we're learning the gates of trust, which is the Jewish approach to conquering fear and anxiety. How can we replace fear with hope, anxiety with faith? Because, like FDR said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. It is the fear itself which will chase away the blessing from us, and it is the trust itself which will draw the blessing upon us. Right now, what we need to be doing is exercising not just our body, but exercising our soul's ability, our minds and heart's ability to trust in troubled times, because it is that ability to trust in troubled times that will draw the blessing of safety, security, prosperity upon us and all of our loved ones. That's what we're doing in this class every weekday morning at 8:30, is that we're studying the gates of trust to be able to flex the muscles and exercise our ability to trust in God by going through this 10th century work incorporated in the duties of the heart, called the Gates of Trust. That's the name of the section. We're near the end of chapter 3. Nevertheless, I think it's proper to suggest explanations of this matter, which will at least to some extent be satisfactory. Why is it that the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? We're going to give now a new perspective, which opens a whole vista, a whole new horizon that helps us understand that as human beings, our perception is very limited. We don't see what came before we showed up. We don't see what comes after we leave the scene. All that we see is what's on the stage. But there's a whole thing going on in the wings. Backstage, there's all sorts of stuff going on. And you can't just make a decision, when you're watching a movie and you see, oh my gosh, this person is killing that person. You say this is wicked and this is righteous. But if you realize that there was a movie that came before this, there was a prequel and there's a sequel and there's all sorts of things going on, just because you saw an isolated case of violence, it doesn't mean that the victim is truly a victim and the aggressor is truly an aggressor. How do you know it's not an act of revenge? How do you know it's not something else going on? There's more than meets the eye, and that's the kernel of the answer that Rabbeinu B'chai is going to share with us right now. So what we're about to learn right now is hopefully material to really get you thinking. Something which you can definitely discuss with your spouses, give you some really good material to discuss with your children, with your friends, during this time of quarantine. The big question, why do the righteous suffer and why do the wicked prosper? Good morning, Harvey. Welcome. Good morning, Cookie and Mickey. Shalom. We missed you guys. Okay, now, one more thing I want to say, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, if you could like this video, if you could share this video to your page, it would be fantastic, so we can incorporate other people in the Torah study to share the wisdom of Torah, to share the experience of connecting with each other in these socially distant times where we can be even more spiritually connected. Please share this video so we can spread the word and spread the light in troubled times. So here's the answer to the question, why the wicked prosper, why the righteous suffer. I suggest the following reasons why the opportunity to obtain his livelihood without trouble and trial might be withheld from the righteous man. He's going to give us about 4 or 5 reasons over here. It may be a consequence of a previously committed sin, for which he is now paying the penalty, as it says. Even the righteous get their deserts on earth. Now, let me put this into perspective. Not everything that happens to us is a punishment. However, it is a well-known concept in Jewish philosophy that God will try to punish the righteous in this world for their minority sins, so that when they enter heaven, they are all clear to experience the pleasures of heaven unencumbered. And we're not talking about 72 virgins right now, by the way. We're talking about a soulful experience, a soul which is a piece of God coming home in the presence of God. There's no physical pleasure in heaven. There is spiritual experience, which is what our soul is. When the resurrection of the dead comes to take place with the coming of the Mashiach, that's when the souls in heaven will be reunited with the bodies down here, and that's when we'll be able to experience physical pleasure again. That's the coming of Mashiach. That's the ultimate reward. But for the meanwhile, heaven is a spiritual experience, and that is where the souls want to experience the pleasures of the next world without being encumbered by the minority sins that they had in this world. And that's why God will punish the righteous in this world for the little bit of sin that they have in this world, and therefore the righteous suffer. And the converse will happen to the wicked, where God will reward the wicked in this world with their minority merits, so that when they go up to heaven, they'll go straight to the basement, straight to purgatory, and they won't be able to be rewarded then with the merit that they had. So let's analyze this concept a little bit. It may be the consequence of a previously committed sin for which he's now paying the penalty, as it says, even the righteous get their deserts on earth. We're going to explore, we're going to expand on it on the converse side, on the side of the sinner. Sometimes it is in accordance with the principle of compensation in the world to come, as it says, to do you good at your latter end, which means there is a plan. God knows what he's doing. The fact that he's giving the wicked a reward right now is not the end of the game. You know, here we always say, a lot of people will tell me that if somebody died, how could that be a good thing? How could it be a good thing if a righteous person suffered, and Rabbi, you say it's going to be good in the end, but they died. It's all over now. It's game over. The answer is it's not game over. It's not. Dying in this world is the end of one scene. There's other scenes that come after this. And just because you've been authorized to observe only one scene, it doesn't mean that that's all that exists. There's life before we're born. There's life after we're born. Remember, our souls are eternal. They are a piece of God. This is fundamental to our faith. Tanya chapter 2. What makes us who we are, what makes us Jewish, is our godly soul. It's a piece of God. It's indestructible. It's forever. So just because you showed up in this earth and you had a certain experience, that's not the be all and end all. Life doesn't begin at birth. It doesn't end at death. So there's much, much, much more than meets the eye. And now we can begin to understand why Moses says to us, listen, certain things you're not going to be able to understand. Moses says to us in the Torah, we read it moments ago. The concealed things are, the hidden things belong to Hashem, our God, but those that are revealed belong to us and our children. There's only certain things that God allowed us to understand. And we have to have faith to say, you know what? God knows what he's doing. For example, how can death be a good thing? Hi, Adam. Good morning. Before I get to your point, Richard, I want to say that if somebody passes away from this world, how do you know? Yes, I guess Richard's question is really the answer. When Richard said previous sin in this lifetime only, it's really got to do with reincarnation. And that's really his next point. So it's kind of connected here. The next point is that how do you know that the person's not experiencing some sort of a completion of a mission from a previous lifetime? Could it be that maybe the soul was sent down to this world to meet a certain person, to engage in a certain encounter, to do a certain mitzvah? And once that mission is accomplished, the person is ready to go back home. So for us, we think that life begins at birth and ends at death. But as far as the bigger picture is concerned, once the person finished their mission, they're off the stage and they're able to be free to go back to their families. You know, we are sitting in the theater, we only see the people on the stage, and only the people on the stage is what makes us happy. But when we don't think about the fact that the guy that goes off the stage when he finishes his parts is now able to go back to his family and he's happy. You see what I'm saying? So it's got to do with the Soda Gilgul, the secret of reincarnation. It might be a sin from a previous lifetime, like you suggest, Richard. Absolutely. It could absolutely have to do with a previous lifetime, and that's really what he's saying over here. When we see the righteous suffer, this could be finishing off some mission from a previous lifetime. And the same goes for seeing the wicked prosper. Same exact thing. And there are many, many stories to illustrate this point. The famous story of the reincarnated prince. In very, very brief, it's a story of a couple that came to the Baal Shem Tov for a blessing for a child. And after many years of pleading, the Baal Shem Tov eventually acquiesced and he blessed them with a child. But the child died at a young age, maybe 10 years old. So the bereaved parents came crying to the Baal Shem Tov. They said, what did we do wrong? How could this happen to us? And he explained to them a story of a king and queen, a non-Jewish king and queen who were desperate for a child, and they basically decreed a decree of banishment upon the Jewish citizens if they wouldn't pray to God to make the queen pregnant, right? Like it's our problem. They prayed, and some soul up in heaven agreed to go become the prince. Some Jewish soul became the prince. Spent the first 10 years of his life living in the non-kosher palace, but after that, somehow he found his way to spiritual fulfillment, to find his way to a Jewish lifestyle. But the first 10 years of his life, that beautiful soul was living in a non-kosher home. And therefore, that soul needed to come back to this world to live 10 years of purity, 10 years of kosher. And that's what the Baal Shem Tov said to the bereaved parents. You had the great and distinct honor and privilege of hosting this tremendous soul as your child for 10 years. So it's not like it's all over. It's just that you've been able to give this beautiful soul what it needed, and now it's done. So it's moved on. We don't have to see this as the be-all and end-all. Now, it's obviously easier to speak about this from a distance, when it's not your child, God forbid, right? Admitted. Fair. And to anybody here who's lost a loved one, I obviously understand that I'm speaking ideologically right now, and I did that. But at least I can share with you, as your rabbi, I can share with you the wisdom of the Torah. So you can apply it in whichever way you're able to. Helen, this goes back to blind trust. You have to trust or not, no in between. Absolutely. I mean, for sure, you have to trust. Blind trust. Agreed, Helen. No disagreement over here. It's Warren, sorry. Warren is saying that it's blind trust, and I agree, yeah. You have to have blind trust. That's the essence of faith over here. There's a big difference between faith and trust, but in this particular concept, it's exactly what Moses told us. Remember, now we go back to the words of Moses. The hidden things belong to Hashem our God. Well, it's really written in the Torah. The hidden things belong to Hashem our God, but those that are revealed belong to us and to our children. There's certain things that you just can't understand. There's nothing you can do about it. It's like the story of creation. It's blind trust because no scientist is able to prove that God created the world as much as the scientists want to prove that. They would love nothing more than to be able to prove that God created the world, but they can't, because you can't put God into a test tube. You can't put God into a laboratory. So there's no way to prove it. So you have to have that leap of faith. Hence the expression coined. Commentary coming in over here. Jonathan, welcome. Brandon, in the concept of reincarnation, the soul is reincarnated in another body. Why would God punish the new body for the sins of the previous body? So there's two levels to this answer, Brandon. First of all, you can look at the body as the Uber. Who we are is really our soul. I am my soul. My body is the Uber. It's the taxi. Don't get too emotionally involved in your taxi, because you're going to leave the taxi at some point and move on with your life. So that's one level to answer the question. A second level to answer the question is an analogy from the Talmud Sanhedrin, which says that one of the Roman emperors asked Rabbi Yehuda the prince about reward and punishment. He said, look, when a person sins, it's the body and the soul. So why would it be that only the soul gets punished in heaven? So Rabbi Yehuda responded, and he said that the resurrection of the dead Or why is he asked about heaven, why is it only the soul is rewarded or punished in heaven, but what about the body? And that's when he answered, resurrection of the dead is when the soul and the body will be reunited and will be able to experience the ultimate reward. So I hope that answers your question, even though much of the stuff we're not able to truly understand. I'm actually studying a Kabbalistic work by the Arizal now, Sefer HaGilgulim, the Book of Reincarnation, by the Arizal, who's 15th century. Tzfat, unbelievable stuff. So I'm getting into this stuff. It's fascinating. Adrian, what about the sins from the previous generation visited up to 200 years after? Yeah, I mean, so there is a concept of children not being punished for the previous generation. You know, children don't get punished for the sins of their ancestors. So not into that kind of stuff. Sorry about that. Susan, if you understand this concept, which is not easy to do, you'll be able to deal with life as it is today with less anxiety and stress. I agree. So yes, if you can adopt Warren Alex' leap of faith and accept and embrace this truth, then a lot of things come into perspective. Remember, there's a lot of things in life that you don't understand. Like the anecdote of the child who, when the cell phones came out, a child turns to his father and he says, "Dad, I don't understand. How does this phone work with? It doesn't even have wires." So the father looks at his son and he says, "1 second. And with wires, you do understand how this thing works." We don't know how it works half the time anyways. I mean, we use cell phones. We don't know how they work. We use regular phones. We don't know how they work. We eat food and we don't have a clue how this food digests into our body. I was speaking to my doctor in South Africa, passed away of blessed memory, Dr. Rodney. He told me that he was like one of the top doctors in South Africa, a really amazing guy. And he said that after, 25 or 35 years of medicine, he thinks we understand maybe 5% of what goes on in the body. You know, we don't really understand how it works. We don't have a clue. We kind of scratch in the surface, but yet we do it anyways. And the same thing, we can employ the same wisdom, the same approach to say, you know what? We're going to do our best when it comes to the principle of reincarnation as well. Because yes, reincarnation does help us put things into perspective. Instead of walking around with a chip on your shoulder all day long, thinking about why God is so nasty to you, or maybe so good to you, you can listen, you know, maybe there's more than meets the eye over here. And think that I just don't understand, and I just got to roll with the punches, right? So Brandon, Hashem, the soul you have given me is pure. This is our morning prayers. How can a pure soul sin? So there's much discussion about this in the 30 chapters of Tanya. But generally speaking, the pure soul is enclosed within the animal soul. And whatever sin the animal soul does, it schleps with it the godly soul. In the words of Tanya chapter 23, I think it was, which is the last chapter, 24, the last chapter we learned, we're about to learn chapter 25. The Alter Rebbe says that anytime a Jew sins, it's like taking the king's head and pushing it into the toilet during the time of the sin. Admittedly, you can clean his head after the sin. You can do teshuvah. But think about what you did at the time of the sin. I mean, it was unacceptable, it was unforgivable almost, the fact that you put the king's head down the toilet. That's what's happening every time you sin, because you have a godly soul with you, and wherever you go, you schlep your godly soul with you. So you are causing this pure godly soul to sin each and every single time that you are doing a sin yourself. Now, Stephanie's asking a fascinating question here. Good morning, Shviger. Which body will the soul enter? So in the case of reincarnation, which is always a fascinating topic, and I'm always itching to rerun that course, Journey of the Soul, which I think people would really enjoy. I know Marty really enjoyed it the first time he did that course with his rabbi up in New Jersey. When the soul reincarnates, it comes into another body, as Brandon correctly pointed out. So which body will the soul enter? I'm assuming that your question, Stephanie, is about the resurrection of the dead. When Mashiach will come, which body will the soul enter? If assuming that I've been to this earth, let's say 5 or 6 times, the Arizal says you can only be here a maximum of 7 times. And the Rebbe says we're all on our last run right now. So now is the do or die moment for us to do teshuvah, by the way. So if you've been here, let's say 7 times before, let's say we were here, all of us, during the generation that left Egypt, according to the Arizal. Let's say we were here during the Spanish Inquisition, maybe during the Crusade, maybe we were 18th century France. Who knows where we were, right? So which body will you resurrect in? I mean, is the real me the Jew that came out of Egypt? Is the real me the 2020 Dovid Vigler? Is the real me the 18th century? Who knows what my name was? The answer is that each and every one of those bodies will be resurrected. And let's say you lived 7 times, you'll come back. There'll be 7 of you, right? You'll be like 7 siblings. Like you have brothers and sisters, you have sister souls, sister bodies. Okay, so let's, a lot of comments coming in here. Andy, people have to accept their own limitations, especially in their own understanding. If they don't, their ego gets the better of them. Yeah. If you say that I demand to understand everything about life, and if I don't understand something, then I refuse to engage in it, that's just only a fool would say that. You'd starve to death before you'd ever understand the human digestive system. You just roll up into a ball and do nothing because you don't have a clue about how the human body even operates. So obviously we have to accept the fact that we are created beings. Our minds and ability to comprehend is limited, and certain things you just got to roll with the punches. Yes, Chabad is about logic and understanding as much as possible, but what you don't understand, you have to realize, is built on a bedrock of faith. Emunah is our faith, is our foundation, and on top of that we build logic, rational understanding. What was yesterday's faith is today's understanding, but I recognize that today's understanding leaves a tremendous amount of faith, right? And it was Moses, actually, at the end of his life. It says he reached Mount Nebo. If you remember, that Moses was buried. He looked at the land of Israel before he entered the promised land. He didn't enter the promised land, but he gazed upon the promised land from a mountain called Mount Nebo, Nebo, Nebo. Now, if you look at that word, Chassidus explains it's actually, you can read it as Nun Bo, which Nun is the numerical value of 50. Nun Bo, 50 is in it. There are 50 gates of wisdom, of Bina. Moses was able to climb the rungs of all the 49 gates of wisdom, and no mortal was ever able to reach the 50th. So he was able to sort of climb the mountain, but never actually experience the 50th gate. Moses is the ultimate paradigm of a human being, the height of humanity, what a human being is able to reach. That's what Moses was able to reach. He reached the 50th gate, Nun Bo, the gate of comprehension. But beyond that, he wasn't able to go further. By the way, even King Solomon, the wisest of all men, it says about him that there were 3 things that he couldn't understand. Even Solomon, the wisest of all men, says, listen, there's a limitation. And with that approach, we're able to, really take on the big questions, like this big question, which is why the righteous suffer and why the wicked prosper. We're able to take it in stride by saying, listen, there are things that came before we were born and things that will happen after we die that we just don't understand. And it's got to do with the Soda Gilgulim, with the secret of reincarnations that might have everything to do with the previous lifetime, that I was dispatched to this world just to do a favor for another, like the famous song goes, for 70, 80 years, a soul may wear and tear, just to do a favor for another. You might have been sent to this world just to do a favor for another person. Who knows? Maybe I came to this world just to connect with a Jew through this medium. Who knows? Who knows why I'm here? I don't know. And once that mission is accomplished, maybe you're ready to move on. God forbid. I mean, we want to have revealed goodness. We want to stay here as long as possible and enjoy our family and enjoy our friends and be able to experience our mission and purpose in this world in the fullest measure. But we recognize that we're only on stage for a certain scene. And once that scene is done, we're done. We're ready to move on. Marty says it was the best course ever. It was the journey of the soul. I believe if you want to hear that course, you can go to our website. Just search on jewishgardens.com. Go to audio classes. Just search in the search box, audio classes, and you'll see my class that I gave in that, The Journey of the Soul. It's in there. I think you'll enjoy it if you want to hear it. Susan, does the soul seek out a body that will help it accomplish its mission? Yeah, I mean, in heaven, they assign a certain, every soul which has a certain mission is given a certain tools, right? So the soul actually chooses not just your body, you actually choose your parents, Susan. You choose which parents you want to aid you on your mission. How's that, right? So you actually get to pick your parents. You get to hear these crazy stories of kids that are suing their parents for There was a story recently of a kid who sued his parents for giving birth to him, for conceiving him without his permission. Crazy world. But according to Jewish philosophy, it's the soul that picks the parents. Should I be born into a rabbi's family? Should I be born into a family of murderers? Should I be the son of Al Capone? I read the other day, Al Capone's son, he died in Northern California. He actually legally changed his name. He dropped the name Capone from his last name. But imagine having a father like Al Capone. A soul will choose their certain mission in this world, right? So if Stephanie's coming back as a 5'7" and blonde, who knows, Stephanie? But hey, wherever you come back, just make sure you identify yourself to me. I'd love to know. I mean, let's like introduce each other. And by the way, it says then that we will be very, it's going to be a very joyous time. Psalms 127. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter. It's going to be a lot of fun, right? It's getting to know each other on a whole new level. I guess, yeah. So let's just wrap up this piece before we get into Tanya. So sometimes it is in accordance with the principle of compensation in the world to come, as it is written, to do you good at your latter end. And that is from Devarim, the last book of the Torah. Sometimes it is to demonstrate his patience and positive outlook in the service of his creator. So now we're moving from a reincarnation approach to a testing approach. Again, God is testing you to demonstrate his patience and positive outlook in the service of his creator, may be exalted, so that other people might learn from him, as is known to you from the case of Job. The case of Job was a righteous man who suffered unspeakable tortures. Why? Because God wanted him to be an example to others. Maybe God needs you to demonstrate his patience and positive outlook in the service of the creator. Basically, you're being tested. And when you realize that you're being tested again, it changes everything. God is constantly testing us. That's what Jewish philosophy tells us. He wants to see how we're going to react under pressure. And God derives great pleasure from seeing our positive choices, and tremendous sadness from watching us fail in our missions. When you realize that our loving Father is testing us, you're on stage. And not only is God watching us, but in the gallery, you've got your Bubbies and your Zaydis and all of your ancestors who believed in you for all time. And they're watching and they're waiting in the wings. They're like, what's my Bubbala going to do? You don't want to disappoint. I picture the scene of being in the football field. We here in America, we have these huge football stadiums, and you have 80,000 people in the stands, 100,000 people in the stands, and the millions watching on television. And you got like 12 people on the football pitch, or maybe 11 people on each side. And you finally got the ball, and it's like the whole world is holding their breath. And what are you gonna do with that ball? Are you gonna pass? Are you gonna run? Are you gonna throw it? Will the ball pass the line? Will it not pass the line? Will it make it before the bell, before the whistle rings or not? And as you get the ball, you sit down, you sit down on the field with the ball, and you say, I'm not even sure if there is a game going on. I'm not sure if there is a God. And everybody's like, Tatale, let's talk about this later. Just run with the ball. Let's wrap this deal up. When you realize that you're being tested, it's a paradigm shift. It's like a chiropractic adjustment when you realize that I'm being tested here. Let me deliver the goods. Let's argue about this later and just deliver the goods, right? Let me finish this paragraph here. At times it is because of the wickedness of a good man's contemporaries, because the other people in your generation, that the Creator may be exalted, tries the good man with poverty, want, and sickness in order to exhibit his piety and devotion in the service of God in contrast to their conduct. As it says, but it was our sickness that he bore, our pain that he suffered. This, by the way, the Christians love to use this verse to explain why he, their God, died for your sins. They love to use this verse in Isaiah 53 for. But what it's talking about is that the tzaddik of a generation, the righteous person of a generation, will often bear their sins where they are too spiritually weak to handle the punishment. So he will take the bullet for the team. Not that somebody died for your sins before you were even born, but that during that generation, the leader of the generation, the Rebbe of the generation, the Moses of the generation, the shepherd of the generation will suffer discomfort so that his sheep will be comfortable. And that's a very powerful concept in Jewish philosophy. That the shepherd will suffer discomfort so that the sheep will have good grass to pasture. Right? He'll be out in the fields for weeks at a time, without shelter. He'll suffer the discomfort of living in the rain and the outdoors so that his sheep will have nice grass to eat from. So that's another concept which we're being introduced here to, which is the concept that there's much, much, much more than meets the eye when you're seeing the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer. Could it be that the righteous has understood, the Rebbe of the generation has understood that the wicked would not be able to handle a suffering, an economic depression, so he'll take the economic hit in order that his beloved children, his beloved flock, will be able to prosper and thrive in difficult times. So that's really what's going on over here. And one final perspective from the Rabbeinu B'chai, sometimes it is because of his failure to demonstrate zeal for God's cause and exact punishment from his contemporaries, as you know from the account of Eli and his sons, of whom Scripture says, and everyone who is left in your house will come to bow low to him for a bit of money and a loaf of bread. Basically, the story goes about Eli, who was the high priest in the days of Samuel, when Samuel was a baby. And Eli was a very, very righteous man, a very holy man, but he had two sons that were lowlifes. Chafni and Pinchas were their names, and they would take full advantage of all the people that came to the temple, to the tabernacle, where it was located. I believe it was in Shiloh at that time. And it was soon after the Jews came into the Holy Land after Joshua. So because Eli didn't criticize his sons for their misbehavior, for their taking advantage of the Jewish men and women, therefore he was considered implicit in the act. And therefore, when a righteous man doesn't criticize, rebuke his co-religionists, the people of his generation, it's sometimes considered as if he himself did that sin. Another example is King Solomon. It says that King Solomon died an idol worshiper. Can you imagine? King Solomon died an idol worshiper. The reason was because he had many, many wives, many more than he was allowed to. He thought that he was smart, by the way. He thought that he was allowed to have one of the prohibitions in the Torah, one of the very last mitzvahs in the Torah, I think it's number 611 or 612, is that you're not allowed to have too many wives. Men out there, listen, you're not allowed to have too many wives. It was a rabbi 1,000 years ago who instituted, Rabbeinu Gershom was his name. He says you're not allowed to be married to more than one wife. Thank God. But according to Torah, the polygamy is technically allowed. It's a rabbinical law, by the way. So for anybody who scoffs at rabbinical law, maybe you should have more than one wife. But the Torah itself does allow for polygamy. But for kings, you're not allowed to have too many wives. I think the limit is 18 wives. Chai is a good number, right? You're not allowed to have more than 18 wives for a king, I believe it is. King Solomon had like 1,000 wives. But because these wives started worshiping idolatry, and King Solomon didn't condemn and criticize them, therefore he himself is considered the idol worshiper. So this answer that we get today from Rabbeinu B'chai is that the righteous can suffer in many cases because they didn't condemn the wicked, and therefore they're considered complicit. Today we spoke about why the righteous suffer. Tomorrow we're going to talk about why the wicked prosper. So we've had a lot of ideas. We're going to kick him around more tomorrow. I'm going to take just some comments of him before we move on to Tanya. On YouTube, Elaine, is it only applicable to Jewish souls? I don't think it's only applicable to Jewish souls. No, every person is created for a reason. Jewish people have a certain mission in this world. The non-Jewish people have also a certain mission in this world. I just often speak about Jewish people because the texts that we learn are geared at Jewish souls and the Jewish construct. Therefore, I speak in the context of the Jewish souls. But obviously, non-Jews have a mission in this world as well and also experience reward and punishment. Julia, always with the tough questions. A child with a degenerative disease, we should never be able to even pronounce such a word. We should never be able to know what it is. A child with a degenerative disease dies after much suffering. Obviously, parents too suffered. Did that person sin so much that he was punished? If that's a terrible thought for the child, if so, that's a terrible thought for the child and family to carry. our perspective on handicapped, on special needs children is often incorrect. The Talmud calls a blind man saginaho, which means an abundance of light in Aramaic, because he has more light, more vision than his body can handle, and therefore his eyes, his eyeballs can't express the light of the soul within him. It's been known that children of special needs, people of special needs, have capacity, have soul capacity and talent that other normal people don't have. They have like an overcompensation of light. So not to endorse, such a condition, but to say that maybe there's something about those souls that we don't understand. Maybe those souls needed to come down to this world for a very specific mission. Not to minimize or mitigate the suffering that the entire family endures. I heard a friend of mine once told me that you can't imagine. It's really, he has a son of special needs. He says, you cannot imagine how hard it is to live with a child of special needs. It's something which you cannot fathom, and nobody should ever need to know. So again, I'm not God's defense attorney here, Julia. Remember that. I'm not God's defense attorney. I'm not here to condone and endorse his behavior, or to explain it away. I can only share with you the teachings of what the Torah does tell us. And I am the first one, Julia, to say to you that we want Mashiach now, that no child should ever have to suffer. And my Rebbe and our Rebbe, always taught, he pleaded for toiv, hanira, ve'anigle, for good that is revealed, obvious, and apparent. We don't want this hidden good stuff. Yes, we learn about hidden good, and there's no such thing as evil. There is only revealed good, and there's only hidden good, and revealed good, and hidden good. There's no such thing as evil. The Rebbe would always say, listen, we don't want the hidden good. How about you turn the hidden good, make it revealed, and then we can all enjoy it. I had a teacher in high school, made a big impression upon me, Rabbi Chazdan. I don't know if Yoni is still there from Johannesburg, but Rabbi Chazdan would often say to us in high school, he would say, it's only funny if everybody is laughing. It's only funny if everybody's laughing. And I say the same thing to Hashem. I say, God, I'm glad that you find a lot of meaning in the suffering of the righteous, in the handicapped person, in the special needs child. I'm sure that you know what's going on over here, but how about you let us in on the secret as well? How about we all enjoy it? And that's what we're yearning for with the coming of the Mashiach. Mashiach is enlightenment. It's uncovering the foreskin of our eyes. Can you imagine there's a foreskin covering over our eyes that makes us blind and insensitive to what's going on around us? That is what we yearn for, Julia. God, open our eyes. Let us in on the secret. Let us understand why. We want revealed goodness. We don't want to have to grope in the darkness anymore. We want to be able to see, to feel, to understand, to appreciate. That is what Mashiach is about. And I'm glad that you agree with me, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you for that. It was a tough question from Julia. Always a tough question. Marty, I'm not sure what your oi comment is about on Facebook. I'm not getting it in real time because I'm sometimes delayed. My Shviger, it's only funny if everybody's laughing. How true and beautiful lesson in life. Thank you, Shviger. I said that to one of my kids the other day. We always try to make light of any little bump and scrape and fall. And one of my kids, he was like really upset about it. And I said to him what Rabbi Chazdan said. I said, what, you're right. Because if you're not finding it funny, then whilst the rest of us are trying to make light of the situation, it really isn't funny. And we've got to really validate your pain and your struggle over here. So that's, the too many wives, Marty. Okay, good. I wonder what Judy thinks about that one. So anyways, I'm not endorsing polygamy. Let me be clear. I'm not endorsing polygamy. One wife is awesome, the best. And I can't imagine what life would even look like with more than one wife. That would be like a whole different kettle of fish. Anyways, folks, let's move on. I'm moving on right now to the study of Tanya. Because today's Tuesday, it's Tanya Tuesdays. And we have a very beautiful and exciting section of Tanya to take on today. I mean, honestly, every section of Tanya is beautiful and exciting. I'm just going to open my notes over here. Okay, so I'm going to open my notes on my phone. Whew. Tanya, awesome stuff. So what we're about to do today is we're about to close a section of Tanya that we've been studying for I think it's 2 years, maybe 18 months. We've been learning all about the mission statement of Tanya. This is tremendous. We've been learning about how it is possible. For the thing is very near to you, in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. How the thing is very near to you, in your heart and in your mouth, to do it. Thought, speech, and action. To be a perfect Jew is real easy. That's what it says in Deuteronomy in the 5th book of the Torah. How's this even possible? This is the premise of Tanya. How is it possible for us to be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action? If you took the 613 commandments, you can classify them into those mitzvahs relating to thought, the mitzvahs relating to speech, and the mitzvahs relating to action. You can be a perfect, immaculate, flawless Jew real easy. And the Tanya's premise was, how is this even possible? The first 25 chapters of Tanya explain how this works. And that's what we're closing today. Even though there are 53 chapters of Tanya, it's the first 25 that kind of lay the foundation of our spiritual makeup that help us understand how we can overcome inner challenge before the Tanya gets into other ideas relating to the universe, the cosmos, and godliness, and other brilliant ideas, which we're going to be talking about shortly. But let me just give you a quick summary of the Tanya. So the first 9 chapters of Tanya give us an introduction to what's under the hood. What do we have? What are the tools in our toolbox in each and every one of us? Again, we're talking about Jewish people specifically right now. The godly soul and the animal soul within us. Then we are, what's the soul made up of? How that works. All of that, by the way, is available on recording. If you contact Ashley at the office, I'm not sure where she put it online, but if you contact Ashley at the office, just call 5616-CHABAD. That's 624-2223. Or if you just email her, office@jewishgardens.com, she will send you all the Tanya recordings from the beginning of Tanya. So you can listen to all those classes if you want to. You got a lot of time in the quarantine now. But the first 9 chapters of Tanya gave us the makeup of who we are and how we're constructed, and the conflict of the souls between us, and the schizophrenia that is inherent to each and every one of us. The next chapters from 9 through 17 gave us the long way as to how we can reach self-mastery. And that was basically through the principle of mind over heart. That through meditating you can create emotion. Even if you're emotionally and intellectually immature, as most of us are in this generation, then you still are able to conjure up enough emotion to control your thought, speech, and action. That's what we learned in chapters 16, 17, 15, about how you can become a perfect Jew by controlling your mind, by directing your thoughts to create your emotions, which then will control your thought, speech, and action. But chapters 18 through 25 introduced us to the shortcut method of how we are able to experience self-mastery, to allow the godly soul to always override the animal soul. That we always will be doing the right thing in our thought, speech, and action, which means even though we are constantly in an inner conflict, as Beinoni, a Beinoni is the intermediary, there's the Rasha, which is the evil one, the Tzaddik is the righteous, and the Beinoni is average Jew, that's you and me, the average Joe, how we can always make sure that on a practical level of thought, speech, and action, we're always doing the right expression, notwithstanding the tremendous inner struggle that we're always dealing with. And the way that we explain that was, I'm gonna work out how to keep this phone on so my notes don't keep on deleting and don't keep on turning off. So the way that we explain this is like this, is that as opposed to the long way of self-mastery, which is by creating a brand new emotion, the shortcut method to self-mastery involves recognizing an emotion that you already have within yourself. You already have an unbreakable love for God. It's an irrational love for God. When we light a candle for a deceased loved one, the reason that we light a candle is because a soul is like a candle. Indeed, it says in the Torah, the soul of man is the candle of God. The candle of God is the soul of man. One of the reasons for that, the way that Tanya explains it in chapter 19, is that just like the candle is made up of a wick and a flame, the flame comes from, and we explained this in chapter 19. If you get the archive, you can listen to the class. I'm not just going to touch on it. The flame originates in the Soda Ish, in the orbit of fire. There are 4 elements in the world. Earth, we know earth. Water just covers the earth. Air covers the water. And then there's the ring of fire, which is the origin of fire. So the candle is yearning to go up because it's trying to reach its origin, the origin of fire, the ring of fire, the invisible ring of fire, which is directly beneath the moon. So what's happening here is that the flame wants to go home even though it knows that it will be extinguished. It's irrational for the flame to want to disappear as long as it goes home. That is the nature of our souls as well. Our souls want to be incorporated within the mothership, within God, even though it means that they will be expired, that the soul will, like a candle, leave the body and you'll die. But the soul actually is unhappy with the status quo. It does not want to be here. It's like a candle that's flickering and dancing. It wants to reach up. So our soul is constantly reaching up to heaven, to where it came from, and it wants to be incorporated within God, even though it knows that it will lose its status. It's an irrational nature, but that is the definition of nature, something which defies logic. Okay? Now, the nature of the soul is to want to constantly be incorporated in its godliness, in its godly source. It's a piece of God, remember, and within that need to be incorporated within its source is also an inability to be severed from its source. The soul cannot exist severed from its source. It always needs to be incorporated within godliness. And the way that we can actually see this expression of this natural love that each and every single Jew has by virtue of merely being born a Jew, or even by virtue of being converting into Judaism according to Jewish law. When you incorporate that Jewish soul, it's a bequest from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, is our unbreakable connection with God. The way that we express the manifestation, the way that we see the manifestation of that, is that when we are asked explicitly to sever our connection with God by bowing to an idol or pledging allegiance to another God, a Jew cannot do it. A Jew cannot do that. You just simply cannot consciously sever your connection with God. And you'll often find that when a Jew is asked to worship an idol, to bow, to convert to Islam or to Christianity, or to get killed, in most cases they'll get killed. And it doesn't make sense. The reason is because the Jewish soul, the godly soul, cannot be separate from its godly source. It simply is incapable of doing so. With that introduction, we recognize that we have already a natural love for God. But now, the Tanya expanded this idea in the shortcut method, which is being summarized today in chapter 25, which closes and ties everything all together. The Tanya says that the concept, the doctrine of God's unity, of Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, God unlimited is Mother Nature. God unlimited is one. That doctrine of God's unity was that not only is God the only God, is Hashem, the creator of the universe, the only God, but also Hashem is the only entity that actually exists. Everything in this world is a part of Hashem, is part and parcel of God. And therefore, each mitzvah, every single mitzvah, is an opportunity to connect with God's essence, with God's will. God and his will are one. But every time a person sins, they're effectively divorcing themselves from God. Every little sin is effectively an act of severance. And that's the key here. The key here is that God is everything. God isn't just in the sanctuary, in the synagogues. God is everything and everywhere, all of the time. So bearing in mind that God is everywhere, this means that any time that you will defy the will of God, even if you're not in the synagogue, you are saying that there's another God. You're committing an act of idolatry. You're committing an act of idolatry because you're saying that God wants this way and I want that way. So even if it's just your own ego that's guiding you, your own sense of self, your own sense of self-identity, you are separating yourself from God. When a soul realizes that I cannot ever be separated from God, I would be willing to give up my life rather than be separated from God, rather than pledge allegiance to another faith. And I want you to think about that for just a moment. What would you do if you were put into that position? If you were put into a situation where you had to either choose, God forbid, between renouncing your faith publicly or getting killed, how would you react to that? Just think about that. And when you think about the challenge and the conflict of emotions and why it's not so simple at all to just say, of course I would bow down to another God. When you realize how hard it is for you to actually say that, you say, you know what, I really do have this thing within me that I cannot be separated. Have you ever noticed why the most secular, non-observant, religious despising Jew, Jew that hates religious people or hates religion, when somebody says to him, you are not a Jew, look at their reaction. I'm sure we've all met these kind of people. When somebody says about them, you're not a Jew, suddenly they become all upset and indignated. How dare you say that I'm not a Jew? Of course I'm a Jew. Hello, where were you last Yom Kippur? Like, what do you, what makes you a Jew? It's an identity thing. They feel that they're still Jewish, even though they don't observe any of the commandments, because we have an essential need to be constantly connected to God, to our source. And we cannot ever consciously sever that connection. What the Tanya is teaching us in this shortcut method is that anytime you do even the smallest sin, you're actually divorcing yourself from God for that duration of the sin. And as much as you would be incapable of worshiping another God, because that is a blatant and explicit rejection of God, of your connection to Hashem, to the Creator, to your Creator, so too, when you do a small sin, you're doing a blatant and explicit divorcing from Hashem, from your source. It's just that there's a spirit of folly. A person doesn't sin unless a spirit of confusion descends upon him, which erroneously convinces him that his act right now is actually not separating himself from God. It's a spirit of confusion that causes a person, that misleads a person from thinking that this is actually an act of severance. Somebody's saying your soul is always Jewish, and you're right, your soul is always Jewish. So a person will say, yep, my soul is always Jewish. I can eat bacon, and I can work on Shabbos, and I can violate every law in the Torah. I can probably even violate Yom Kippur. But my soul is always Jewish, right? That's what they say. My soul is always Jewish. Guess what? When you realize what the Tanya is telling us, that God is everywhere. God is everywhere all the time. And even when you do a sin like eating bacon, what you're doing is that you're divorcing yourself from God. You're saying, I'm not Jewish at this moment. And I use the marriage metaphor. When you're married, it is true that there are certain things certain red lines that no spouse will ever cross. Well, that no healthy spouse will cross. Let's say adultery, explicit adultery. It's like a real big red line. But when you think about it, when you criticize, when you say something really ugly to your spouse, really harsh, nasty criticism. You're doing the same exact separation, same divorce. In the same way that you're divorcing your spouse while you're doing adultery. God forbid physical abuse of a spouse, emotional abuse is a red line that you would never cross. But emotional abuse also, physical abuse you'd never cross, God forbid, a healthy spouse. But emotional abuse, we sometimes convince ourselves, we say, I can speak harshly to my spouse and we're still married, right? Because you convince yourself that you're still connected. But really, you're experiencing temporary divorce for the duration of those harsh words. And if you only had the clarity to realize how far away you are pushing your spouse at this time, your loving spouse that you're so proudly married to, God forbid somebody should say that you're not married, but the harsh severance that you're creating for the duration of this time that you're speaking harshly, if you'd realize how you're actually causing a temporary divorce between yourself and your spouse, you would never do it. You would never speak in such a harsh manner. You'd always speak patiently, kindly, and lovingly. Because you would never willfully and consciously want to divorce from your spouse. Now, the metaphor is not precise because when it comes to marriage, some people do want to get divorced. Some people have good reason to want to get divorced and they need to get divorced. But when it comes to God, there's no such thing. God is not just our marriage partner. God is our very life source. If you cut the cord from God, it's like cutting your umbilical cord. You now will die. God is our oxygenation, hydration, and nutrition. God is our constantly sustaining us at every single moment in time. If you cut that cord, you're dead. So there is no option for being separated from the mothership, from God. It's like, those scuba divers, the old-fashioned scuba divers that have that big box on their head and the pipe that carried the air to the ship at the top of to the boat at the top of the water. So it's like cutting that cord and saying, I don't need the air pipe anymore. Okay, then you're gonna suffocate under the water, right? So I use the marriage metaphor only to be able to explain what happens when we become unconscious spouses. When we become confused and we don't realize that the more we speak harshly or do ugly things to our spouses, God forbid, the more we are actually divorcing from them. And I think I mentioned this in the last class, one of the great modern day marriage therapists, he says that if you have more debits than credits, more negative moments than positive moments in your relationship, you will get divorced. It's going to happen. With that in mind, you'll say, no, I love my wife and I love my husband and I'm going to do everything that I can to never sever that connection. So that's what Tanya's teaching us in the shortcut method. God is everywhere. It's like a whole holistic relationship that we have with God. Anytime that we violate the will of God, anywhere, even in the privacy of our own homes, we are divorcing ourselves from God, even if you're not in the sanctuary. And with that approach in mind, the Alter Rebbe is opening our eyes to be conscious of the spirit of folly that confuses us, that desensitizes us from the separation that we are creating each and every single time that we sin. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, he says, think about this. Someone held a gun to your head and he said, bow down to this idol or I'll kill you. You'd be willing to suffer the tortures, the harsh, unspeakable tortures, and even the pain of death to be able to maintain the integrity of your connection with God. If you'd be willing to go to those great lengths, then surely you should have what it takes to overcome the relatively minor discomfort of withstanding temptation now before the sin that you're pondering, or surely you'd have what it takes to push yourself to be diligent in the fulfilling of a positive mitzvah, which will enhance and deepen your connection with Hashem. Once again, you're willing to suffer the unspeakable tortures that the anti-Semite is willing to impose upon you, God forbid, so as not to forsake your faith, your connection with God. So surely you should have what it takes to overcome temptation and to push yourself to fulfill the positive mitzvah. And with this, the Alter Rebbe sums it up and he says that we have this natural love within us. And if we only were conscious of it, of how we cannot bear the thought of being separated from God, and how we have this need to be constantly connected with God, that should suffice to motivate us to fulfill all the 248 positive mitzvahs and never to violate the 365 prohibitions, so that we can be a perfect Jew in thought, speech, and action, notwithstanding the inner struggle which rages within us. When it comes to a state of actual expression, you'll be able to control your thought, speech, and action because you'll never consciously want to sever your connection with Hashem. The Alter Rebbe concludes with a most beautiful message at the very end. By the way, this chapter is something so fundamental and important. Chapter 25 of Tanya. That on the day of his wedding, the Rebbe was instructed by his father, the saintly Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Dnipropetrovsk. He was instructed by his father to study this chapter of Tanya on the day of his wedding. And now you can probably see why. Because if nothing else, you want to take this chapter of Tanya as the foundation of the rest of your life, the foundation of your marriage. To be a conscious spouse, to be a conscious Jew, to recognize that the vase will break and the dinner will be burnt sometimes, and he will be late when he said he'll be on time, and there will be times that you'll be frustrated and angry with each other. But remember that every harsh word, speech, every harsh word, action, or thought even separates you from your spouse is a temporary divorce. And if you love each other, you'll never want to be harsh in thought, speech, or action. And the same goes for our relationship with God as well. But the Alter Rebbe concludes this chapter with a beautiful comment. He says, at the threshold of the promised land, Moses is not going to bring the Jewish people into the promised land. He will pass in the desert. And as his successor and disciple Joshua, that will lead the people into the promised land. It was our souls. Remember, we spoke about reincarnation. It was our souls that died in the desert, and we are the ones that were reincarnated in this generation. All of us listening here, all of us in 2020, we were the Jews that died in the desert, that came out of Egypt because we didn't have enough trust to trust in God and Moses to bring us into the promised land, and therefore we had to reincarnate in this generation because we're about to enter the promised land properly this time with the coming of Mashiach today. Amen. It is at the threshold of the promised land that Moses tells the Jewish people, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, God Unlimited is Mother Nature, God Unlimited is one, and he instructs them to love God your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your being. He's basically telling the Jews that I want you to be willing to give up your lives with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your being. I want you to be able to give up your lives to fight for God. Now, it doesn't really make sense, because why would Moses be telling the Jews to be willing to die for God when he's already given them the extraordinary promise that they will be victorious in their wars? Like, why do they need to fight so hard if they already know that they're going to win the war? Alter Rebbe explains that Moses wasn't talking about the war against the non-Jews. He was talking about the war against the Yetzer Hara, the war against your evil inclination. Moses, as he was leaving his flock, as the sun was setting on his watching over his people, he was leaving us with a code that would be able to carry us over the next 3,300 years. A code that would be able to help us overwhelm our evil inclination in the most darkest and difficult of times. He says, look, as long as you're willing to fight to the death, that's when you'll be able to overcome your evil inclination. That's when you'll be able to love God, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your being. When you recall the shortcut method of Tanya, when you recall that I'd be willing to die for God if I needed to, if I was called upon to denounce my faith, it is that realization that I'm willing to die for God so as not to be divorced from God. That is what it takes to motivate you to fulfill all the positive mitzvahs and all the negative mitzvahs, all the 613 commandments, the realization that I cannot be divorced from God for even a moment. The awareness of the day of death, the awareness of what I'd be willing to do if I was called upon to die or divorce God. Of course, I'd be willing to die. How much more so should I motivate myself, therefore, now to not divorce God through the relatively minor sin that I'm facing with right now, the temptation. That's who Moses was talking about. He wasn't talking to the generation. He wasn't talking to that generation to tell them that they needed to fight the enemy until the death, the physical enemy. He was telling them the only way you'll be able to overcome your spiritual enemy, your yetzer hara, your evil inclination, is when you recall that you'd be willing to die for God, says not to be separated from God. That is what it's going to take to motivate you to be able to be a perfect Jew in thought and speech and action. And this is what summarizes and concludes for us. Chapter 25, the shortcut method to self-mastery. And it is with this that we've concluded about 18 months of Tanya, about how we're able to be cognizant of the inner struggle that we all are experiencing within our godly soul and our animal soul, and to allow dominance and mastery to our godly soul over the animal soul by recognizing the natural love that we all have for God and the natural awe that we have, the inability, the fear to be separated from God at any moment, at any time, even for an instant. It is that fear that we have from being separated from God. By the way, this is the meaning of fear of God. The true meaning of fear of God is not a fear of God, but a fear from God, a fear of being separated from God, because we cannot ever be separated from God, be divorced from God. We need to be connected with Hashem all the time, because Hashem is our very life force, our oxygen, our nutrition, and our hydration. Everything that we need, we get from God. We are a part and parcel of Hashem, and we couldn't be separated. No healthy entity can be separated from the hand that feeds it, and we therefore cannot be separated from Hashem. It is this awareness of this natural love and fear that we have, bequeathed to us by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our forefathers and foremothers, that we all have, that is sufficient to motivate us to self-mastery, to perfection in thought, in speech, and in action. Friends, so share with me your thoughts and comments as we finish this section of Tanya. Andy, but if the relationship between the soul and its source, God, is personal one-to-one, why the focus on the external speech and action of that person? If the relationship between the soul and its source is personal one-to-one, why the focus on the external speech and action of that a person body says about his belief in God to society at large? Of that body says about his belief in God. I'm not really understanding this, Andy. I'm not understanding your question. If the relationship between the soul and its source is personal, why the focus on the external of that person says about his belief in God to society at large? I'm not really clear about what you're asking. There's some spelling mistake over there. I didn't catch. Robin, no. Hi, Robin. Wow, this must be Marty's sister. So nice to have you joining us. That's great. I see there's a conversation going on between Marty and someone else, Susan, over here, which is great. Okay, and let me just give Andy a chance to retype his question. We've got a heckler, okay. Okay, I'm not sure what that is, but anyways. So Andy, again, I'm not sure if you're asking the difference between thought and speech and action, or I'm not really understanding. If you could clarify your question, please. But for the meantime, I do want to share with you this, that from here we start chapter 26 of Tanya. Chapters 26 through 31 goes through much more down-to-earth Tanya, which is how to deal with depression, how to deal with anxiety, how to deal with inner struggle, how to deal with humility, how to deal with anger. We're going to go through a much more down to earth. Up until now, it's been way out there. It's been very spiritual. Now we're going to be much more practical. Now that we understand the soul makeup and how we can reach self-mastery, we're going to be more specific with with character development in the next 6 chapters, a lot of fun. And then we're going to hit some of my favorite chapters in Tanya, chapters 33, 34, 35, which is about the purpose of life. Very, very, very exciting stuff. See, the comments are coming in again. My mother-in-law, Susan, had a question. Go back a few messages. I think Susan's question was answered by Marty. Andy, you're focused on action, and I am emphasizing thought and feeling as what really matters. So Andy, are you asking why action is important? Is that your question? Bear in mind that when God commands us to do a mitzvah, any mitzvah, when we do that mitzvah in thought, speech, or action, we're connecting to God's essence. God and his will is one. His will is in the action. His will is in the thought mitzvah. His will is in the speech mitzvah. When you do a mitzvah, you connect with God's essence. When you abstain from a mitzvah, you are rejecting God's essence, divorcing from God's will, divorcing from his essence, saying, thank you, but no thank you. I have my own God. I am my own God, and you're effectively serving idols. That was the principle we were saying, that you're either with us or against us. That was, I think, the George Bush doctrine. You're either with us or against us, right? So when it comes to God, God is light. Where there is no light, there is darkness. Everything light is supposed to be everywhere. If there's no light, then if you're blocking the light, you're creating darkness. You're creating a pocket of separation, of divorce, of idolatry, separate from God. And that's why, Andy, any violation, whether it's in thought, speech, or in action, is a rejection, a divorce from God. And every observance of such is a connection with God's essence. And that's really what's going on over here. Any other comments coming in here? I think that's pretty much it. Folks, how do you feel? Do you feel that this is able to motivate your divine service? Do you feel that you can connect with this message? Can you see yourself meditating upon your natural love and fear of God, of Hashem? Can you picture yourself in that scene of how you would react if somebody spoke about you as a non-Jew? Maybe you were in a business conference. If you were at a business conference and they started making fun of the Holocaust, would you have courage to stand up and say, by the way, I'm a Jew? Think about that. I mean, it's an interesting question. What would it take? What is your red line? Think about that. What is your red line? What happens if your child says that he wants to marry a non-Jew? A lot of people tell me that they would disinherit their child. I know a lot of our viewers have children in that exact position, and we should never be tested. But every one of us has a red line. What is yours? Which is the point that you would say, I would never be able to cross this line? Maybe if, I don't know, maybe if somebody wanted you to go into a church and eat communion in a church, would you do that? Well, maybe somebody won't go into a church in the first place. What is your red line? And think about why that's your red line. Why is it irrational that you cannot cross that red line? And realize that the reason is because you cannot ever divorce from God in a state of consciousness and awareness. And when you realize that state of consciousness and awareness, you realize you can extend that inability to separate from God, that red line, to really incorporate all the mitzvahs. Because every single sin that I do is a total act of divorce from God. And every mitzvah that I do is an act of marital union with God. Can you relate to this concept? I would love to hear your comments. Andy, if a person loves God, perhaps God cuts him slack about what he does in daily life. You know, Andy, I want to comment on that before I look at the other comments and say, let's replace the word God with wife, okay? Let's just replace that for a moment. If a person loves his wife, perhaps his wife cuts him slack about what he does in daily life. And I'd like you to ask Hannah that question. You know, if she asks you to take out the garbage and you say, no, do you think she would cut you some slack? Probably not, because you were rude and you were nasty. Yeah, I'm sure that she loves you, But I'm curious to know what Hannah would say. I know that I think my wife would find that very insulting. I can't imagine that. Yes, of course, you have to give the other the benefit of the doubt, but why do you have to insult them? Yeah, I'm sure God, and by the way, Andy, to answer your question, God does give you slack. Absolutely. Don't forget about the teshuva. You can always make up. Always, always, always make up. Nothing stands before teshuva. But why do you have to insult? To bite the hand that feeds you? Why would you do that? It's like, well, God is going to forgive me, so it's okay. But why would you consciously want to do that? Right? Marty, I would definitely stand up to an anti-Semite. There you go. So Marty, your line over there is your red line is an anti-Semite. You would never hide your faith, right? You would never hide your faith in front of an anti-Semite. So that's maybe your red line. So now say, because you would never separate yourself from God, even if it's irrational, even if you're going to get beat up, God forbid, right? You would still stand up and defend your faith, right? So why is that? Because you can't be separated from God consciously. Use that to motivate the observance of your mitzvahs in business or in personal life. I've done that at work years ago. Susan, I think we are cut slack. Yeah, there you go. So Susan agrees with me. She thinks that we are cut slack, that God cuts us tremendous slack in how he allows us to operate, even though we are oftentimes not exactly perfect. So this is it, friends. I hope that you found this meaningful. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of this employed and engaged. I think during this quarantine time, we have a lot of time to meditate and to think about our core values. And let's do that. Let's try to do that today. To think about what your red lines are, where you would never cross when it comes to your relationship with Hashem. And you might think, like, why would me, a person that's not exactly 100% observant, why would I never cross the line? And realize it's because of your natural love for God. You can't ever be separated. And when you make peace with that, you'll realize, every time I sin, I'm actually doing a mini divorce. And I shouldn't be doing that sin either. Take over this chapter, friends. I encourage you to read the chapter inside. If you go to jewishgardens.com, search Lessons in Tanya, study chapter 25. Of Tanya. That's chapter 25. It's awesome. It's beautiful. It is really game-changing. And I encourage you to think about this chapter every single day before you daven. If you want a meaningful davening experience, learn this chapter. Think about it. It's esoteric. It's abstract. You need to digest it. You really, really need to think about this concept. But if you can come into davening after thinking this chapter, after meditating upon it, I think you can really deepen your connection. Susan was awesome. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day. I'm starting with new energy and understanding. It's awesome. Terrific. Good to hear that, guys. Anyways, folks, I better sign off over here. Wishing you all a wonderful day. Be safe, be healthy, and I hope to see you all very, very soon in good health. And shalom.